us now Michael Schnell, MSNBC congressional reporter, and Michelle Norris, MSNBC senior contributing editor. Michelle, I want to start with you because we have these two judges that say, get this money out, right? What we know about this contingency is that there isn't enough money to give everyone who is supposed to get it all of their benefits. So there will be people in this country that wake up this morning expecting, because this is how people plan for their lives, expecting to have money to be able to pay for food for their children, for themselves, and we're at the end of the month where they already are stretching every dollar that they have. Talk about the kind of yo-yo effect, the uncertainty that those folks are living in and what that does to us.
So yesterday was Halloween. So families that rely on SNAP had to already dig a little bit deeper to buy that Halloween costume, to buy the candy. And now at the first of the month, that's normally when you do your biggest shopping if you're on SNAP, right? Yeah. Because that's, you try to load up because if things get tight later in the month, you try to make sure that you have a few extra cans of this or that. Even if the states come through, because you've got this interesting juxtaposition that a number of states are actually figuring out how to tap into emergency contingency
New York,
funding
Maryland,
there, right? And even if they come through and they provide some sort of contingency funding, there is a lingering effect here. And as you noted, this affects Republicans and Democrats. Hunger knows no boundaries. And people will remember, if you've ever experienced food insecurity, even when you satiate the hunger, the insecurity, the panic that you felt, not being able to know where your next meal is coming from, not being able to know if you're going to be able to feed your children, that is something that lingers. And when you've got this perfect storm of food insecurity, healthcare costs rising, and then heads start being snatched from people who rely on that, this is a problem that the Republicans are going to have to deal with. And I think that that's why you're starting to see the break in the ranks and these, calls that have now been, we've learned about this. They're getting that messages, and they're not here in Washington. They're back at home. So they're seeing this firsthand. And this is going to be something that will affect the Republican Party. The Democrats will see some blowback from this also. But because you also have this juxtaposition of Trump saying that he can't figure out, whether we should follow the judge's ruling or not, and at the same time talking about his big marble bathroom. Right. So we've got this 18-karat confusion, that's going on where he can't figure out how to fund this, but at the same time, he's talking about building a ballroom, he's renovating his bathroom, and so it just, the confusion around this doesn't make sense.
Michael, on the point of the panic of food insecurity that Michelle was just talking about, I want to play some sound of SNAP recipients in Florida and New York and what they have to say about what they're going to be going through. Watch this.
I'm only down to 1 pack of chicken, and I don't even know what I'm going to do for the next months. My son won't have his milk, and we won't have food. I'll go without eating it or anything as long as my kids eat.
When you talk about your grandson, you got a little bit emotional.
That's my boy. That's my boy. And he's a kid. He doesn't deserve it. He shouldn't have to wake up and my daughter tell him he can't eat.
I mean, I'm glad we were able to play that sound so that we take it out of the theoretical and put it into the voices of people who are living with this. My question to you is, and my wonder is, do stories like that sound like that actually have any kind of impact on Capitol Hill?
I think in a way, yes, and in a way, no. So for the first part, this week was really the first time we actually saw the impasse kind of start to break. It didn't fully break. It maybe didn't even crack, but it sort of started to move in that direction. It was the first time in the 5 weeks of this government shutdown that we have seen a possibility of the light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's because a lot of lawmakers were nervous about this November 1st deadline. We always knew it would be open enrollment, and that really wasn't perturbing Republicans. But when you brought in the issue of SNAP, this is where it really got real for a lot of people. 42 million people on SNAP, districts across the country. That's why lawmakers were sort of saying, well, we're kind of optimistic this week. We feel like we're at maybe getting there. But they didn't get there, and that's the point. And senators left town before we got this ruling from the courts that said, well, you actually have to put out the SNAP benefits. So it nudged things in the right direction, but it didn't get folks there. And that's been the fascinating part. We've spoken about it. That's been the fascinating part about this government shutdown is the pain points that you would expect to immediately get a resolution. 42 million people losing their SNAP benefits would be within that camp. It just hasn't pushed the two parties into compromise because this impasse is so entrenched.
And Jonathan, your question actually reminds me of this line from Josh Hawley's op-ed in the New York Times this week, surprisingly advocating for SNAP to reauthorize it at least temporarily.
He's a huge SNAP recipient.
And he wrote, one suspects that if senators couldn't buy groceries, the government would never close down again. But Michael, can you also just set the stage for us on the status of negotiations with regards to the broader shutdown? You were on the Hill this week, had a lot of great reporting. Are conversations actually starting to happen?
I mean, they're happening, and they've been happening since the beginning of the shutdown at this rank and file level. We've seen different bipartisan Democrats and Republicans have these conversations, but they haven't bore any fruit yet, and that's the big issue. And so, again, we saw this optimism from lawmakers this week, and I've been talking to them every single day. I hadn't heard this cheerfulness from any of them in a very long time, especially during the shutdown. So there's this thought that maybe because there are these increased conversations, we're getting somewhere. But again, to the point I was making before, we haven't gotten there yet. So Lisa Murkowski, for example, she said people can be talking, but those conversations actually need to lead to something in order to get a resolution and get out of this. For this entire shutdown, both sides have been talking past one another. Democrats say we're not opening the government unless you extend the subsidies. Republicans are saying we're not extending the subsidies unless you open the government. I mean, just completely talking past each other, ignoring one another's opinions because they both think that they're right. So, yes, we saw increased conversations, discussions, and optimism this week. But whether it actually leads to a resolution, that's still the million-dollar question. And to the point you guys were making before, the fact that they weren't able to get there with SNAP benefits being dried up in just a matter of days, not a great sign, but I think we're in a better place than we were maybe 3 weeks ago.
Oh, great. Those were the bad place
Not
3 weeks
saying
ago.
much,
Yeah. But, you know, one of the things that's so interesting is, you know, them all having conversations, the rank and file, no shade to them, but, like, it doesn't matter what they think, right? At the end of the day, leadership needs to be having conversations. Right. There doesn't appear to be a lot of conversations. And most importantly, the president needs to be involved, especially this president, Michelle, because, you know, in other negotiations, whether it's shutdown or debt limit funding negotiations, the president, whoever it is very involved, especially as it drags on. President Trump spent a week in Asia. Met with Xi, great in China, great. You know, he should be doing that. But I remember when President Biden canceled a trip to Australia to do debt ceiling negotiations, and he left town yesterday, went to Mar-a-Lago to hang out with, you know, throw some big fancy party for Halloween. He's supposed to be the deal maker, right? He wrote the book, or somebody wrote the book with his face on it, called The Art of the Deal, and that's what he has prided himself on. And yet, he's about to have possibly the top. Right now, he has 2 of the longest shutdowns in history with no negotiations in sight. He doesn't seem to be as interested as he should be in that.
Well, it shows the dysfunction of the White House, and again, how this is not functioning as a White House we would normally see. Normally, the White House has the Legislative Affairs Office, which basically functions as its lobbyist, and you may have seen a little bit of it yesterday with Trump kind of backtracked on, you know. His social post number 1 and social post number 2. The language in social post number 2 looked like someone had actually whispered in his ear and suggested this is not looking good for you. But normally you would have people in that office and chief of staff and others who are basically working the Hill and trying to, like, bring people together. You're not seeing this in White House. In this White House, he doesn't take counsel from other people. He's not interested in this. And so I think it's really going to depend on folks on the Hill maybe getting a sign from him, but not direction from him specifically, because even though he talks about the art of the deal, the way that he's negotiated on Wall Street or in New York, you know, as a developer, is very different in Washington. He functions as a king because he can't lead as a president. And those are 2 very different things. I mean, the president has to, it's about not necessarily coercion, it's about cooperation, it's about comedy, it's about trying to bring people together to actually negotiate. Negotiation in Washington is something very different than the sort of strong-arm tactics that he's used as a developer.
Yeah, it is a seemingly one-way conversation from one end of Pennsylvania to the other, unlike the usual business the way business is conducted. But Trump is this morning waking up to a headline on the New York Times homepage that I don't think he's going to be happy about, which is everything you just pointed out, which as the shutdown pain grows, Trump attends to other matters. I mean, Michael, when what are you hearing about the conversations between Trump and Senator Thune and Speaker Mike Johnson? Do you think are we going to see a meeting next week? Is Trump going to finally open up the line to Democrats?
He's suggested, folks have suggested that he'd maybe be open to it. I know that there are certainly lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who want that to happen. Republicans have always called President Trump their closer. It was particularly a line we heard often during the big, beautiful bill negotiations, that President Trump would come in at the last minute, strong-arm some members into place, and then the bill would pass. We're hearing the same thing, but interestingly enough, from both sides of the aisle this time, Democrats and Republicans saying nothing is going to happen until the president gets involved. Particularly Democrats are saying that President Trump needs to give his members the okay so then they can wrap this thing up. Up until this point, to your question, Jackie, they've said that they've all been on the same page. Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune like to say all the time that they've spoken to the president. They're in lockstep and that there's unity in the Republican Party. But interestingly enough, Democrats have kind of been a little effusive of President Trump throughout the past few weeks. It seems like trying to goad him to the negotiating table. We hear from Leader Schumer all the time. Well, President Trump is a negotiator. He's a deal maker. Let him strike a deal this time. I think that in a lot of people's back of their heads, it's that 2018 Oval Office meeting when President Trump said that he would take responsibility for the shutdown if it happens. I think that's the reason why particularly Leader Schumer had really pushed for that initial Oval Office meeting a few weeks ago before the shutdown had happened. So certainly Democrats are pushing for one. Will it happen? Do John Thune and Speaker Johnson think that would be the best thing when they've sort of have this strategy going? Maybe not, but the president's back from Asia, and there are certainly a lot of lawmakers who want to get involved. And not to mention one more thing, right when he got home from Asia, he entered the conversation with that filibuster call. So it may be an indication that he wants to get involved, or is at least paying attention now that he's back stateside.
Or at least wants Republicans to do what he says.
Right. Yes. And once he jumps in, they will do what he says because he functions as a king because he can't lead as a president. I love that.
He rests on right.
Sorry, wrote it down. Here it is.
You remember how we used to talk about the big lie, Trump's denial of the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election and his attempt to change the outcome of that election in the states, in the courts, and ultimately with an attempted coup by his followers on January 6, 2021, the day on which the election was to be certified? Well, the big lie's back, but now it's forward-looking. It's the big lie 2.0, and it's already underway. Trump and his henchmen are not waiting for next year's midterm elections to undermine them. He's already starting, because what Trump does so well is to sow procedural chaos. And that's what we're seeing in this year's elections, which are 3 days away. Last Friday, the Justice Department announced that it will be sending so-called federal election monitors to California and New Jersey for Election Day, the sort of people we send to other countries to monitor the safety and security of their elections. In California, they're headed to 7 counties, ostensibly to oversee the voting on Proposition 50, California's ballot initiative about redistricting, which is a direct challenge to Trump's own efforts to have Republican-governed states undertake mid-decade redistricting ahead of the midterm elections next year to gain Republican seats in Congress. In New Jersey, the election monitors are going to Passaic County, a community that's 43% Hispanic, for a gubernatorial race. Now, there are a few elections on Tuesday, so the choice of California and New Jersey, states in which the elections are run and monitored by Democratic administrations, is telling. Notice that no monitors are being sent to Virginia, where Republicans control state government, which suggests that this might not really be about oversight of free and fair elections at all. If Trump and his foot soldiers once again manufacture a fake crisis, claims of corrupt elections and rigged ballots and fraud everywhere, he can use that manufactured crisis the way he did before as the justification to interfere on a much bigger scale in more states and counties and districts that tend to vote for Democrats in 2026 and in 2028. In plain terms, this is a rehearsal. California Attorney General Rob Bonta immediately pushed back against the DOJ's announcement, saying his state will monitor. The federal government monitors themselves. Governor Gavin Newsom called it a federal intrusion into a state-run election, voter intimidation disguised as federal oversight. Election attorney Mark Elias put it bluntly, quote, "This is not the Merrick Garland DOJ. This is not the Bill Barr DOJ. This is Donald Trump's Department of Justice, and they're not sending out these monitors to protect minority voting rights. They're sending them out because they're trying to test the fence, end quote. Trying to test the fence. The Trump administration is training you to accept federal agents, and we don't know whether these ones are going to have badges or will be armed, so that by 2026 and ultimately the next presidential election in 2028, something that is entirely not normal feels routine. We've lived this moment already. In 2020, Trump tested the fence. He tested whether he could overturn the people's vote. He failed. So for the big lie 2.0, you can expect some major improvements to the effort to be in place. Non-compliant officials across the federal government have been replaced with loyalists. The Pences are gone. The Vances are in. The GOP is no longer a political party, but an extension of Trump, populated, as in many authoritarian states, with friends and family of the president. And that makes another coup attempt not just possible, but likely. Trump's Truth Social feed is already constructing the narrative that he can use to justify election interference. Back in August, he announced a movement to eliminate mail-in ballots and voting machines, declaring, quote, remember, the states are merely an agent for the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes. They must do what the federal government, as represented by the President of the United States, tells them, end quote. They must do what the federal government, as represented by the President of the United States, tells them. That's not just false. It's wildly authoritarian. The truth is actually the opposite. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution gives states, not the president, control over elections, stating specifically, quote, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. The Congress may alter such regulations, not the president. And for the record, the federal government is represented by the people, not by the man posting glam shots of bathroom renovations while millions of American families brace for skyrocketing health care costs and a funding lapse for food benefits. But that historically has been Donald Trump's strategy, to claim powers he doesn't have and call any election that he doesn't win corrupt. Just last week, he used the NBA gambling scandal to relitigate the 2020 election, comparing alleged cheating in the NBA to Democrats cheating in elections, calling the 2020 presidential election a far bigger scandal. He demanded that his DOJ investigate Democratic lawmakers with the same, his word, gusto that federal agents used to pursue the gambling case, once again repeating the lie that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. At the very same post, in the very same post, he smeared California's Prop 50 vote as totally dishonest. As New York Magazine noted, quote, Trump's post isn't an effort to influence the Prop 50 vote, which he knows his team is going to lose. It's a warning that he will regard the passage of Prop 50 as illegitimate by definition and will use it along with his totally made-up allegations that Joe Biden's 2020 election was fraudulent to change or at least delegitimize the midterm elections, end quote. And that is the 2025 play. Normalize the tools and the narrative for a much bigger assault in 2026 in the midterms and in 2028. I keep saying 2028 for a reason. While Trump constructs and finesses the big lie 2.0, he's testing muscle on the ground. Since June, as you know, he's deployed National Guard units to Los Angeles, to Memphis, and to Washington, D.C. He's fought in court to send them to Portland and to Chicago. He's openly floated invoking the Insurrection Act to sidestep governors and courts, boasting, quote, I could send the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, I could send anybody I wanted, end quote. Once again, Trump is conditioning the public to accept armed federal presence where people live and eventually where they vote. Zoom into the states and this soft rolling coup becomes even clearer. Right-wing groups have built giant voter file databases with the help of AI-driven software that enables mass challenges to voter registrations, according to the Brennan Center. We've already seen hundreds of thousands of voter challenges in Georgia, thousands in Pennsylvania and Michigan and New Hampshire and New York. Big data makes the process very cheap and fast, so the voter purges will grow with every cycle. And as we've been discussing since the Texas redistricting debacle, they're gaming electoral maps. They're using highly partisan and in some cases apparently racial gerrymandering to tilt elections in favor of Republicans before a single vote is cast. This is what seeding procedural chaos looks like. Okay, that's a lot of bad news. That's the first thing in the morning, so I don't want to upset you too much. There is actually good news. The good news is the outcome of this is not predetermined. Trump's rants reveal the card that he has to play. He's telling us step by step exactly how he plans to rig the system and then bury the evidence. And that gives us something really important, the ability to identify the threat in advance, the ability to strategize and prepare, the ability to organize. Endless speculation about the big lie 2.0, will he or won't he? It's a trap. It's a waste of our time. When people actually show up, that's what works. In 2020, lawyers, judges, and ordinary citizens forced the certification of the presidential election in the states. In Wayne County, Michigan, ground zero for the first nullification attempt. When officials flirted with refusing to certify the election, the public flooded the meeting. The plot collapsed the moment that locals caught wind of it. Republicans were willing to subvert democracy in the dark, but not so much in front of an engaged public. That's lesson one for 2025. Pay attention right now so that you can mobilize fast. So what does that look like? Well, volunteer as a poll worker or an election observer. Register voters through local civic organizations. The math is simple. The more people vote, the harder it is to overturn those votes. Number two, create voter buddy systems, especially for neighbors who fear intimidation at the polls. One tactic experts are worried about is the potential deployment of ICE agents to polling places. You can see why some qualified Latino voters, never mind Latino voters, anybody who's a little bit brown like me, wouldn't want to get caught up in a raid, thrown into detention until they can clear their names just for going out to vote. Build local rapid response teams, groups of ordinary citizens who show up as they're doing in courts right now, at county meetings, at certification hearings, at voter drop boxes. Your physical presence is a deterrent to improper and illegal behavior. Follow what's happening in other states. That's why these elections on Tuesday are so important, whether you live in one of them or not. The military deployments, attempted voter purges, the election monitors, consider them all trial runs for the bigger play, the one that's going to happen right where you live. And finally, do not let Donald Trump and Republicans normalize talk of a third term. A third presidential term is illegal, full stop. So when that one uncle floats a third-term loophole conspiracy over Thanksgiving dinner, don't let it slide. And if your uncle insists that it's doable, hand him one of these, a pocket constitution, opened to the 22nd Amendment, Section 1, which reads, quote, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice." The second power grab is already underway. It's being rehearsed right now in Chicago's streets, at California's polling places, in courtrooms across the country. But we can stop it because we're reading the script in real time and because we've stopped it before.
Election Day is just 3 days away, and one of the most closely watched contests is the New York City mayoral race between New York State Assembly member and Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani and former Governor Andrew Cuomo running as an independent, and Republican Guardian Angels founder Curtis Sliwa. Recent polling shows the race tightening slightly, but Mamdani still leads Cuomo and Sliwa by double digits. Joining us now is former New York Governor and New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Cuomo. Governor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I want to start right there. We're 3 days out from folks finishing voting here in your city. And I'm curious what you and your campaign are going to do at this point to convince people to change their minds. We're looking at all of these different polls, including a poll that your team sent that still has you 6 points behind. So what are you going to do at this point to change folks' minds?
Yeah, thank you for having me. First of all, 6 points is nothing, especially in these polls. And the polls in this race have been wrong from day one, but 6 points is nothing. It's almost the margin of error. And what we're seeing
three is the
an
margin of error.
Unprecedented. Yes, I said it's almost the margin of error. What we're seeing is an unprecedented turnout of voters. That's why I would take all these polls with a grain of salt. I think you're going to have an historic turnout of New Yorkers, which is good. More voter participation, the better. But it's also a symbol of how concerned New Yorkers are about this election and the city and the state of the nation, frankly. So I have been obviously going all across the city. They are concerned about public safety. They want more police on the streets, affordability, more affordable housing. The only way to do that is to get government to actually build more affordable housing and stabilize the economy. Corporations have been leaving New York. People have been leaving New York. And they want to know that New York has a future and that we're getting those companies and those people back.
Governor Cuomo, I'm glad you mentioned public safety, affordable housing. These are things that, as mayor, you're going to have to work with the governor of the state in order to get a lot of the things that you want done, not to mention, getting things from the state in terms of the budget. You and Governor Hochul used to be your lieutenant governor. She is now the governor, and she has endorsed your opponent. Do you think you will have a good working relationship with the governor to bring home the bacon to the Big Apple for the people of New York City if you become the governor? I'm sorry, if you become the mayor.
Yeah, but I know it's confusing, Jonathan. I'm with you. The first short answer is yes, as you said. Kathy Hochul, I selected as my lieutenant governor. I served with her. We have a nice personal relationship, a good professional relationship. Public safety really is in the purview of the mayor. How many police officers you hire? I want to hire 5,000 more police officers. Mayor Adams says we need 5,000 more police officers. Commissioner Tisch, New York City Police Commissioner, says we need 5,000 police officers. So that's within the mayor's purview, and that we can do. Affordable housing, yes, you have state funding. You also have federal funding, by the way, which is the mainstay on housing. But it's up to the city to actually get the housing built and sited and financed, et cetera. But on the bringing home the bacon, that is always the $64,000 question. And it's between the state and every city, right? As governor for 11 years, I got the budget balanced on time every year. Hasn't been done since. I had to make a budget deal with Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse and New York City. My advantage is I know what the state can do. So I know, I'll know the budget from both sides of the table, if you will. We want our fair share from New York State. New York City is the economic engine for New York State. The state needs the city to do well. But I also know what the state can do relative to the overall context. So I think that gives me the advantage.
Governor, I want to ask you about a moment you just had that reminded me another moment in 2008 when Senator John McCain was at a town hall when a supporter called Barack Obama an Arab, and she told him that she couldn't trust Obama. McCain responded immediately. He took the microphone back and he said, "No, ma'am, he's a decent family man, a citizen that I happen to have disagreements with sometimes." He was obviously widely praised for that moment. It was a moment of moral leadership. Last week, you were on Sid Rosenberg's show when he said Zohran Mamdani, when he talked about Zohran Mamdani, and he said, God forbid another 9/11 happens. Can you imagine Mamdani in the seat? He'd be cheering. You laughed. You said it was another problem. And then the very next day, Mayor Adams stood next to you and warned about Islamic extremism if Mamdani wins. And you stood there and you nodded along. You've now had a week or so to unequivocally condemn these remarks. Will you do so right now on camera? And why didn't you have your John McCain moment?
Well, John McCain, I have, may he rest in peace, a total respect for. If a supporter of mine said that, I would have said exactly what John McCain said. I was on a radio show with a radio commentator who made that comment as a joke or laughing as he said it. But he was not my supporter. He's a radio commentator. I don't normally, and I don't think normally we hold elected officials or politicians to correct a comment from a journalist.
Right.
I don't remember I don't believe the mayor, and excuse me, I don't believe Mayor Adams ever said that, unless I missed it, but I don't believe Mayor Adams ever said that Mamdani was an Islamic extremist. I don't believe he said that.
No, but
I believe he said the opposite.
He warned about Islam. Well, then I'll ask you point blank here. I mean, my question, in my words, do you condemn Islamophobic comments about Zohran Mamdani unequivocally?
100%. 100%. I condemn Islamophobic comments, anti-Semitic comments, racist comments, bigoted comments, anti-Italian comments, of course. You know, New York, as New York governor for 11 years, attorney general, our diversity is our strength, but it can also be a weakness. So you have to work very, very hard to make sure you're always keeping people united. And there's always flare-ups among different races, religions, creeds for one reason or another. After COVID, we had hostility towards the Asian community. So, yes, I've always been there to unify people. And I condemn and pass the strongest hate crime law in the United States of America, by the way.
Governor, I want to make sure and give you a chance to correct the record if you didn't mean to say, but it sounded like you said diversity can also be a weakness. What did you mean by that?
Diversity can be a weakness if you have antipathy among groups, Jonathan. If you have racism or anti-Semitism, et cetera. So then you'd have friction, right? Which we have had in New York. And so you have to work very hard to keep it as a positive and to make sure that it's not a negative and you have zero tolerance for any racism, any anti-Semitism, et cetera.
Andrew, Governor Cuomo, really quickly, I'm going to get in trouble with my producers because we need to let you go, but you know, Democratic voters have been kind of clear since the 2024 election that they want fresh blood, they want non-establishment figures. You know, you are someone who's a former governor, long family history in the state of New York. I think, you know, it would be honest to say that you're a member of the establishment. Why do you believe that you would be the exception to the rule? When we're hearing from Democratic voters, they want anti-establishment candidates.
Yeah, I get the general rule, Jonathan. We want fresh blood. We want a fresh face. I get it. New York City, the mayor is an important job, and people want to be safe. People want affordable housing. People want to see the economy working. And in New York City, you can have a major crisis at any given time. A couple of days ago was the anniversary of Hurricane Sandy, big storm, 50 people died. I don't think they want a mayor who has no experience or ability to do the job. And Mamdani, literally, this would be his first real job besides being a two-term assemblyman. Never managed anyone. And I think that is giving New Yorkers real pause. You know, in this city, it can be a scary city, as you know, Jonathan, and you want someone in that seat who can handle whatever comes up. Experience is not a bad thing, Jonathan.
Right. No, that is correct. And this is Jonathan now. It was Eugene who was asking you those questions. Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, thank you very much for coming to the weekend.
Joining us now is Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She's a member of the Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Congressman, I want to ask you, first of all, thank you for coming on. There's rumblings of discussions to reopen the government. Maybe small gangs of senators are reportedly working to find a way out. But, of course, Senate Majority Leader John Thune said he won't discuss any Affordable Care Act changes until the government is open. What have you heard, and is there a possibility of any breakthrough happening soon?
You know, I am not convinced if there is a possibility of a breakthrough as relates to it coming from the top down. I think that this is going to have to be a bottom-up effort. You know, there's been a lot of discussions about how much travel has been interfered with and how many planes have had to be canceled. I think that those are the types of things, those types of disruptions, the disruptions as it relates to SNAP benefits and WIC benefits. I think that those are the rumblings of the people that will finally solve this. Unfortunately, unfortunately, we have people that are not prioritizing the very people that put them into power, starting with the President of the United States, who has failed to sit down with the four corners, the leaders within the House as well as the Senate, to decide that they were going to come to a resolution to make sure that we can move forward in a way that benefits not just red states, not just blue states, but benefits the United States.
I mean, there just doesn't seem to be that much of a sense of urgency from the White House or Republicans. And does that tell you that they think they can end this shutdown without capitulating, without giving in to Democrats' demands?
You know, I don't know what it says. I mean, it is very hard to say that you can predict anything when it comes to this White House, especially when it comes to this particular president. I will tell you that, you know, it seems like he's not on the same page with the Republicans. We know that here recently he basically said, hey, just go ahead and explore the nuclear option. You know, they've been trying to blame this on the Democrats the entire time, when those of us who understand how things work, they have exploited the nuclear option more than once. And I'm not suggesting that they should. I'm actually suggesting that there's two ways out. Number one, you can either explore the nuclear option, which means that we reduce the threshold from 60 down to an even 50, or you could do what like most real politicians would do. They would actually negotiate. And if you are willing to talk about what it is that we can do as it relates to the Affordable Care Act on the back end, then why can't you talk about it on the front end? In addition to that, I do want to point out, because the House has failed to go in under the failed leadership of Johnson right now, here's the issue. We could be going through and getting through the actual appropriations bills, because the continuing resolution is only supposed to be a stopgap until we actually do our work. Well, considering the fact that we've been sitting this out, we could have been working. We could have been going through the 12 appropriations bills and getting those over to the Senate, and then we would at least potentially not even need the stopgap, or we'd be able to put different governmental departments back online because we've completed the actual appropriations. Yet Mike Johnson doesn't want to bring us back.
I also want to ask you about SNAP. Yesterday, a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to keep paying those benefits during the shutdown, but it's unclear if or even when the 42 million Americans who rely on food stamps are going to get them, and 3.5 million people in your state of Texas. So what is your response to Republicans who are saying maybe we should take another look at this program because too many Americans are on SNAP? And what are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, I will tell you this. I will agree with them on one thing. I will agree that there are too many American people that are on SNAP benefits. But that means that you got to not look necessarily at SNAP. You got to look at the reasons that they're on SNAP. We know that over 1/4 of these people that are in receipt of SNAP benefits are actually the working poor in this country, right? We have not increased the minimum wage, and I don't know when, and the minimum wage still sits at $7 while everything else is going up, whether we're talking about the cost of food or whether we're talking about the cost of rent or whether we're talking about the cost to actually try to engage in home ownership, if we're talking about the interest rates. And we know that under the failed leadership of this administration, this country has seen a loss of 1 million jobs, and that's just in the first few months. He's not even had a full year. So no, we need to work on economic policies that will put people into a position in which they are not the working poor, where they are still needing the $6 a day to eat. So yes, we need to talk about it, but I don't think that SNAP is the problem. I think that that is the resolution, or at least that is a symptom of the problem. We have a bigger problem in which we have billionaires that are continuing to rise up every single day and are getting richer and richer, to the extent that there was talk about Elon becoming a trillionaire, the first one in this country or in the world. Yet we still have people that have to go to the food bank and go to work, that have to sit there and go to make sure that they've got money on their SNAP and EBT cards. Like, that's a problem, and I do think that we need to address it.
And you mentioned it's about 30% have income, but that number goes up to 55% of SNAP users if you include families with children. I also want to ask you about another huge cost right now, and that's health insurance. The Kaiser Family Foundation estimates about 17% of your state's population did not have coverage in 2024, and more than 1 million might become uninsured if these subsidies expired. What impact do you think that will have on families in your state? And are you hearing concern across the aisle on this issue?
I am absolutely hearing concerns kind of in general, and many of those on the other side of the aisle do not want to admit it publicly. You have pretty much only really seen Marjorie Taylor Greene be honest about this and talk about the issue as relates to the number of her constituents that are going to potentially go uninsured. And when we talk about this, I want people to understand, because I feel like some people are just callous about this and they're like, this doesn't impact me. And overall, all of this is impacting you. Everyone's insurance premiums are going up because of the big ugly bill, number one. But number two, just because somebody doesn't have health insurance coverage doesn't mean that people somehow now are not going to be sick. I need people to understand that there are oaths that many doctors have decided that they are going to honor, unlike the oaths that many of my colleagues have taken in which they've decided to disregard. And so when somebody gets sick, that means that they're going to be at the emergency room regardless as to whether or not they have coverage. And overall, we all end up paying for it. And it is so much more expensive than making sure that that person has coverage and they're able to go in on a consistent basis and see a doctor and hopefully prevent any escalation of any problems that they may have health-wise. So this is a catastrophic issue for all of us, and we all need to be in.
Congresswoman, very quickly before I let you go, are you running for Senate? What's going to help you make that decision?
I have no idea just yet. What's going to help me is data. You know, basically, we haven't elected a Democrat statewide in the state of Texas in over 30 years. So to me, it's not about the current electorate. It's about whether or not I can expand the electorate. I know that the numbers exist in the state of Texas, but it's just about whether or not I am the candidate that can excite people that have never paid attention to politics to get involved, something that we saw from a junior senator out of Illinois when he became the president of the United States, and something that, frankly, we saw out of Donald Trump. He was able to excite people that had never really been engaged in politics. So that will be probably what determines whether or not I get in.
All right, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.